my own father came to Seanie in 1920, and he served his time in the Corneals. It was he was a wheelwright coach builder, and my father served his time as a young lad there, and his father paid 10 shillings. Instead of he getting paid 10 shillings, he was paying 10 shillings to learn the trade, and he had to sign a contract that he wouldn't damage his employer's tools or steal or do any depredation. And he in 1928, when he decided to start out on his own and have his own business, he bought the title of a property where we are now in Stafford Street. And he had 7 children. I was one of them, 6 girls and myself. And he turned out horses, cars. He was a wheelwright by profession, and he did numerous carpentry work in terms of services to the farming industry, you know, wheel making, tram car making, such. And he died in 1969. I was serving my time as a coincidence in the same firm that he served his time in, which was the Ormond Garage. That's where Corneals, he started. They owned that when he was a young man. So I found myself finding out the history of how the coincidence of how what goes round comes round. And I thought it was very unusual, because it started to piece together itself for me. And I was saying, that's a coincidence. And then when I got his documents together after he died, I found that he lived in Tyrone.
Tyrone?
Yeah, that's where he started off as a young married man. He rented a place, and before he built the new house that we lived in and that I was born in. But a coincidence was, I didn't find out that he lived in Tyrone, his address was Tyrone, until I bought my house in Tyrone, bought my site and built in Tyrone. So the circle was completing the circle. And I figured if that was the way, I'd end up with a bunch of girls as a family when I got married. It turned out the other way around. I had only 1 girl and five boys, whereas it was the other way around with him, you see. So the coincidence started to mount up over my life. My present eldest son, John, is well, you know, called after my father. He took up the timber business, even though we educated him, sent him to college and got him ready for probably an easy lifestyle, as we all think about him. We don't want the hardship that the people came before you had. And he wanted to go back to the timber, so he's in Stafford Street now in the old forge, which is the River Lane building that we built there. And the next son is an architect, and he's overhead him that's where his office is. He's self-employed as well. And the third son is a medical engineer, and he's employed, well employed. The fourth son is a biochemist analyst. He's employed in Scotland. The fifth son is electronics engineer, and he's going through a stage at the moment where he's changing his job. He's half working for himself for a company. And the daughter then is another medical engineer. She's the youngest. She was the last of the bunch. And my life has always been involved where I was born. I haven't had any changes. So I mean, some of my friends here in Seanie are guys I socialise with after school and going to school, and they're limited down to 4 or 5 lads that I can trace back to my school days as well. The rest of them, some of them I don't know where they ended up. A lot of them went to the city, and a lot of them immigrated. So employment was really the factor that kept you close to your roots. And my roots were tied to me when my father got sick. I was only serving my time, and I had to abandon the job just when I was qualified to help him out, because he had a terminal illness. So that kept me at home. I wouldn't have left Nina while he was sick, and I had to.
As a carpenter, was it?
Me?
Yeah,
no, I qualified as a mechanic and a panel beater, and I started my own business to be near my father when he was sick. And I probably started younger than I would have. I mightn't have ever started. So I uprooted the whole place at home and remodeled it and rebuilt it, and it kept me going right up to the present day. I suppose a lot of bad planning, because I used to do things without hiring an architect or getting in. I just pull down and build, and it kept my interest in the place ongoing. The original malt house seemingly was built around 1720, and it was owned by the Smith family. They were brewers. The meaning of the malt house meant that the grains and what the farmers produced went in there and was processed either through export meals and flour and what have you. And they could use the same product to make beer, and the beer was brewed in the malt house. And in 1825-26, the Boer family purchased the malt house, and they continued as brewers, and they opened licensed establishments in the town of Nina. 2 or 3 brothers of them, Willem and John Boer, and they had a young family, like we were talking about, a family of children. They educated them. They sent them to King's Inn and all those big high class, because you see they were a money making family, and they educated their children, and they gave about from 1820 up to 1840, 1850 in the malt house, and made a success of their business. And then the movements in Ireland were beginning to create problems for alcoholism. You know, the Father Matthew Crusade came into being, and that got the malt house closed down, because people were very religious and they followed the priests' advice and took it on board, and the drink was like drugs today, you know. It destroyed families and it left people poor, no food, all went and drink. So the Father Matthew Crusade, as was known, came into being, and of course it put a bad image on all the breweries and whatever. So the Boers had shut down that business, and they decided to settle for the income from their little hostelries, and they had their kids educated, sent away. So they were good citizens, good Irish people in the sense they were very good to the people around, the population around. They turned away nobody. So the image you create of decent people and not decent people, you can see it from the good things they do in life. If you do one good thing in life, if you do a lot of good things in life, your image and your character is good for life to everybody that comes after you. They hear about the goodnesses. If you do one bad thing in life and you do 99 good things in life, the one bad thing destroys the 99 good things, and your character is gone forever. So to be able to walk with your head up is really the relic of decency. Nobody finds fault with you as such, you know.
Were they local people?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you or I, you know, your parents came from where originally, and you became a generation, a second generation or a third generation. That made you local. Once your parents had you in the locality, that meant this was your native place. Whereas they may have had their native place, maybe Portroe, Dublin, Mayo or Galway or wherever. Whereas your sentiments are rooted. Once you were born in this, my own place, kind of, that's just putting it in its context, you know, your own place where you originated from. And the Boers, to me, were good people, and they allowed their premises to be turned into a workhouse during the famine. The famine actually came when the Father Matthew Crusade was in Spain, and maybe the famine and Father Matthew Crusade was associated with the poverty that arrived, because people had no money, they had very little food, and cholera and all them diseases set in, and they died fairly rapidly. And the Boers kind of looked after the poor more so than most people, because they had the money, and they made sure that the people that couldn't get into the original workhouse, which was, I suppose, the upper class workhouse for the well-off people that could afford to go into. The poor people died in the streets during the famine, but the workhouses that were opened up were the two in Barrack Street, Boers Brewery, which Barrack Street now, you're associating the malt house with not Barrack Street, but it's part of Barrack Street, because the Boers house and their business was fronting off at Barrack Street down to the malt house. The Well Road there wouldn't have been there. That would be a green field, and that was the back. They called it the Spout Road because there was a well down there, and you had access from dirt tracks, laneways, but the streets were, when we say lanes, that look like streets, but the small lanes would have been behind, fronting the rivers and pathways that people found you had to use, because people drew water. You know, water was a valuable commodity, and you know, washing, and you had animals, you had maybe a horse or maybe a donkey, and you had your drawn turf, or you were doing things that transport, like the railway line here wasn't available at the time. You know, this all came in that century as well, and you had a mode of travel where people had little horses' cars and little traps and sidecars, and water for the horses, water for the house, water for the tea. You can imagine people bucketing water from rivers, washing their utensils and their clothes. So water was the most valuable commodity for the poor people. So the river, the Clarine Stream, which is River Lane, the Nina River was a bit removed from a lot of the population of the town, so the Clarine Stream served a lot of people in Nina. It acted as a culvert for washing away sewage as well. You know, it went into the well field down there.
So what's the Clarine Stream? Is that the rerouting of the river?
The Clarine Stream is coming through the yard in Stafford Street, through our place, and it's going across Kenyon Street, Barrack Street, under the road, and it's going into the well field there. Back in the early 1800s, the railway wasn't here, right? So you can see the well field down there, and if you walk 100 yards hence, you're back into Stafford Street, nearly fronting Stafford Street. Now the river was very inconsistent flowing wise. It would get heavy during rain and weather and would flood, and to spread out onto the headland around it. When it flooded from the well field back up as far as the cattle mart, it used to have boggy, miry ground. Now the railway divided up that problem by rising drainage, and in 1840, when the railway was put in place, they controlled the flooding by building a culvert from just across the tracks here, right across through the yard. Instead of letting the stream off that way, they controlled it into a culvert, so the water had room to flow fast, so that the flooding didn't affect the ground that it was affecting. So it began to dry up here, but the river going into the well field, that's where Joey's supermarket is, that continued to be always flooded, and it still is. It can be a flooding problem because all that water is going into that portion of Nina, and it's taken the old storage in Nina before they upgraded it, was all going in there as well.
So would the water have been going up past the malt house?
No, the malt house would have been to the left of it. The river, to route you to the river, you come across the tracks where the hump is there, where you see where the hump is. It crosses the tracks under the railway there, goes across adjacent to the creamery building, comes in where my car wash is, comes down to the front of the antique, the Forge River Lane, goes down the lane in between the entrance, across the road under, you know, that new building that's to the left of Louis McMahon, as we say. It's going in under that, going down to one side of Abbey, crossing the road there just beside the Friary, and into that field there, and it's underground there since Abbey and Joey built. They built slabs over it. So
was there still water flowing there?
Yeah, water flowing right under me down there.
I think you were explaining that was the old route. I didn't realise that there's still actually
water. Yeah, it's just still flowing river.
And is there any purpose for it, or just to alleviate the other one, is it?
Well, no, that stream is coming down from the mountains, coming down from Keeper side. It's coming through the countryside, and it is a river, a natural stream. And it serves farmers, and it serves people, cattle, drinking water. It serves its purposes. Now, Nina mightn't have been developed as fast if the water wasn't available. You see, anywhere you have population, a growth of population, it's usually adjacent to a river. All the old towns depended on the water for animals and drinking and washing and general water supply that they could use for sewerage, wash systems, and the government and the local authorities tended to develop. Back in the old days, the town commissioners, they were called, and before that, urban council that came into being. That only came into being in 1898. Before that was the town commissioners, and the town commissioners is going back to the British government. The town commissioners were all retired officers, soldiers that got plots of land, or they got farms. You know, they were the promises that they were mostly Scottish descendancies. All these likes of Dundas, Baileys, all them officers that got the land when the Irish were limited to the education as well, to be able to fight their hot corners, you know. And the land was, if you look at all the big landlords that were here from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, all their descendants are Irish now. They all settled in, you know. Their old titles were colonels and captains and that. Colonel Bailey was one living outside the town there, and his title came through his military forebears in the British Army, you know. So
you just go on to the next one now about Barrack Street.
Yeah.
As you were saying before, a lot of people thought that Barrack Street got its name because the Garda barracks was there.
Yeah, that even people I knew, even up to Ovalade, thought that was on account of the Guards barracks. And it's simple enough that, going back to what I was saying about your curiosity. You know, it doesn't matter how curiosity can bring out the best of the information. If you're curious enough and you ask the question you want to know, some people say, what the difference is it going to make? I don't want to know. But my curiosity as a young lad, I didn't question it either. I didn't probably want to know when I was a young boy. I always thought the Garda Barracks was the reason Barrack Street was called Barracks. And then when I researched my own piece of ground in history, I discovered that I was living in the middle of the barracks, which I didn't know when I was growing up. But I found that the title we have on our property belonged to the British government, and originally the Prince of Wales, he was the landlord. And I began to question how the hell, nobody else's property around was in the same boat. And I found out then that I was living in the horse barracks. See, there was a foot barracks and a horse barracks in Seanie, and I was able to trace it back to 1670. And I could go back to 1630 when the regiments set up their barracks in Seanie, but I could have definite that was 1670. I'd be speculating if I went back further. And I was saying to myself, how I questioned it, I queried. I said I better find out how this came about, and I discovered that was the barracks. It was the horse barracks and the foot barracks, and any research I did was giving me the wrong impression of the barracks later. All the old historians thought it was going parallel with Barrack Street to the opposite side of Barrack Street, and even the good historians that came about were following the river, but they were following it from the wrong angle, that the horse barracks and the foot barracks was coming parallel with Stafford Street. Stafford Street was in the middle of it, and it was coming from the back of Tobermoor houses. Do you know the Tobermoor houses here in the Well Road, just before that new row of houses going in there opposite DSB? The boundary wall was actually the graveyard wall, and it's going in at an angle behind those houses. If you go out the back of them houses, there's a big stone wall there. So that was the in wall of the barracks, and it was coming as far as the graveyard, coming up the Well Road here. The graveyard was coming straight across where the railway bar is. The FBD building would have been inside the barracks, and the wall was coming right up at the back of Sutton's and crossing over at the end of our property and going to the back wall of the antique shop, and that was the square. It was 4 acres, and it was all one in we say, from the time it originated in the 1700s right up to 1830 and 1840. And Nina would have been running on the line of the way the church is built. In other words, the laneways would have been going this way, that way. There was no such thing as a big wide main road. It was kind of laneways running. There were 60 houses from the tower to the hospital. So you had little laneways, and people ask me all the time where Dirty Lane is known as. And I tell them it was at the back of Joey's house, opposite our hospital, here in Tyrone. And it's coming out across the road and into River Lane. That was Dirty Lane. Now, it only comes up in historical maps, but people didn't know where it was really. But that was Dirty Lane, and the reason it got its name as Dirty Lane was a dirt track, so a mud track, and they called it Dirty Lane because it was an access laneway going to the hospital before the road went in. So you imagine that road not being there and the Dirty Lane running farther in behind through the aluminium factory nearly. And it left me trying to imagine what way was the land and what way was the Nina. And looking back that far, there was only about a population of 286 in Nina in 1700, 1730, 1740, and it went up gradually. And I began to research then, was it military originality that brought the population up, because the military set up their barracks in Barrack Street. And I came across, and the new Barrack Street, which was called Kinnan Street later, Barrack Street, it went through the middle of the barracks and out to Yon. So it divided the barracks. So the foot barracks was on the far side of the street, but the horse barracks stayed where the water was, the river. The benefits of the water really kept it in favour of the horses.
So just to put it into, just in case somebody's watching this in years to come, like, and they're wondering, what do you mean by barracks? Is he talking about Garda barracks?
Military.
British military barracks.
Yeah. You see, if you go back through the centuries, we say from today, we look at the 21st century and the 20th century, we know more about it. Army barracks is nearly an unnecessary it's unnecessary as it was back then. Back then you had an awful lot of wars and insurrections. You had conscripting of people from the populations to fight the Boer Wars, First World War, Second World War. So it was a government business to get volunteers and get people into the army. Now it was a way out of poverty as well, because you got fed, you got the Queen's shilling, as they called it, it was known, it was better than starving, better than having no job. Now, people weren't overeducated. Your ability was limited to your pair of hands, and if you didn't make a living, join the army. That was so. A lot of people that joined the British Army, even that Irish-born people, they went in there because it gave them a life and it gave them seen a bit of the world, and they married and had their families maybe in other countries. We don't know. During the famine, people were sent away out of towns when the poverty hit and put on a boat in Limerick, sent to the colonies, the British colonies, and all they seen when they were leaving was the poverty that they were getting away from. So their sentiments were totally destroyed. They married well, probably some of them married good and married good, honest, goodness, foreign people, and they started off sound, had probably families that they educated, but their sentiments wouldn't have been thinking about Ireland, because it was poverty that drove them out of it. People dying, their memories would have been of their families dying of hunger and what have you. I mean, I wouldn't exaggerate the poverty that was in Ireland during the famine, but we had a lot more famines. People were very badly off even without the famine. When the famine came, they died. People died by the hundreds. Before that, we had minor famines, if you like to put them in that context, but people didn't have anything. So the good times of areas developing, people learning their trades, carpenters, saddlers, bucket makers, I mean, they were all decent trades. You made a living out of them. Coffin makers during the famine. The coffin makers were the biggest trade during the famine, full-time job. It's a morbid thought to have to discuss, but it was a fact. And grain, barley, all those maybe employed quite a number of people during the harvesting season. So there was seasonal kind of work. and you lived off your wits as well. You know, you went to the bog and you saved turf and you did all the things that supplemented your livelihood to keep the house warm for the winter. So money didn't have as much significance because people didn't have it. But if you had a farm or a small piece of ground that you had chickens on, you had a bartering arrangement with maybe your neighbour for butter, or likewise they swapped their butter for eggs, and the only thing you had to buy was flour if you didn't have a little secret millinery that you could grind your own flour. And there was lots of I won't call it daylight robbery or nighttime robbery, but people that when they worked for farmers, they brought the grain in their pockets home with them, you know, a head of grain, and they might have 2 pocketfuls of grain off the wheat, the barley, the tops, and they had these little millers at home that they'd grind it down into flour, and that piece of bread was well appreciated when it was oven baked. You might have had 6 children or 7 children. There was big families, and they all had to be fed. So Barrack Street came about through.
Was the barracks kind of seen as a kind of hostile thing here, or did people hate them, do you think?
No, because people got probably more from the soldiers when they were hungry. I mean, my bit of delve into the history of the barracks was during the hard times of the famine. I wondered about the same question that you asked, and they fed a lot of people. Now, the people, the town commissioners that were involved in the running of Nina at the time, they were people that were associated with the British in the barracks, and ex-officers that settled in Nina that retired because they had a piece of property maybe acquired through their record of service to the government. They got their share in portions of properties in Nina. Landlords, they married landlords' daughters, and the land was kind of, they were given little tithes of start. And those people, when they retired out of the army, they went on the town commissioners. There were numerous names that came up as military, you know, the Gasons and all them, the Willingtons of Ballinackie owned a lot of the farming land around North Tipperary. That would have been land that they acquired through their service as well, and they associated themselves with Nina as being Irish people after a generation of first generation family coming after them. They became good Irish people. And the question you asked in relation to a lot of Irish people were members of the barracks. They'd have been soldiers, and they'd have been local. They became local. They married local girls, and they started their families, and they never left Nina. So I mean, that's the way life evolves. If you go to a new town, even as a worker, to go to work at a new town, the chances of you meeting a girl, if you're single there and settling down there, are 100%, 90%. If you don't like the town, you don't socialise in it, or if you stay in the town long enough, you'll eventually become part of it and marry there, and your kids will be, you won't drag them away from it, even though your old sentiments might be back where you came from. That's that question, if it covers your...
Okay, I'll go on to question 8. So tell me about the tower at the top of Taffer Street.
Yeah, well, I can go back to about 1600 and something. I just write down a few notes on my piece of paper there, just not to be straggling. You see that that tower had known history going back to 1615. That church, that tower was rebuilt in 1760. It went into disrepair, and it was modified like all old buildings. Time gets them, and the tower was rebuilt and re-rounded, re-squared off, and there was a bell dated about 1760 put into it when it was done. So that gave genuine reason to believe that the bell went in when the tower was rejuvenated. And the Boers, actually, if you look at that placement of that tower in relation to the Friary, the Friary church there in the Well Road, I mean, if you were to step it out in terms of ground, they're fairly adjacent to one another, even though we're looking at them from a different context off of this side. The Boers were in between those two churches, the brewery and their business and their home house. So Boer, during the middle of the 1800s, discovered the ruins, partial ruins of a church between those two churches. And a lot of the old history going back to the Holmeses relates to old Peter Holmes dragging in from Petersfield. That was his home place, which was above where the Christian Brothers School is, Petersfield. And he used to come down Castle Street with his horse and six horses in his carriage to the church, the old church here in Kenyon Street, in Barrack Street, to Mass every Sunday morning. Now, he used to come through the mud, so the history of it gives you an idea that he was coming through a muddy dirt roadway from the Dublin Road down to Mass every Sunday morning with his 6 horses. And he would have had the Holmeses came to Nenagh in 1630. The first Holmes came to Nenagh as secretary to the Earl of Wentworth, which was a military commander, that he was secretary for the Queen, for the King, for the Prince of Wales, if you like to put it. And he acted as secretary, and he had a family here, and they went on for 3 generations from the one Holmes right down, and the last Peter Holmes wouldn't have been the last of the Holmeses, because one of the original Holmeses had sons that married as well, and one of them became a bishop of Belmont down in Offaly, Bishop of Firth. He had his seat. The reason they call him seat is where they lived. Their seat was in Belmont, whereas Peter Holmes's seat was here in Nenagh, in Petersfield. That was his seat. And the last of them Holmeses would have been a son of the Bishop of Firth. His son was William Bassett Holmes. He was the last of them Holmes that died in 1906, and the Holmes family was gone in 1906. So they existed from 1630 right up to 1906. Now, you probably heard that Nenagh was owned by the Holmeses. A lot of the property in Nenagh was held the Holmes landlord, and that was because the second generation bought the title in Nenagh because it was land. There was no houses in 1730, 1740. You might have had a big house up at the Market Cross, you might have had another. You can imagine the population being down to hundreds, that the big landowners had their big houses. So if you could remove the town of Nenagh out of it and look down, we said back in the 1700s, you'd see big landowners, big domains. But Nenagh became a market town then. The busiest part of Nenagh were in the 1800s. Nenagh started to explode from 1790 right up to 1850, with buildings, fairs, corn mills. All the trades started to flourish, and the stonemasons were probably like the building industry booming here for the last 15 years. Stonemasons were pulling down all the old shacks, because you might have had one big house in the middle of Barrack Street, you might have had another at the Market Cross, and the traders started to buy up the plots off of the homes as landlords to build their little shops, and instead of sitting on the side of the street like a car boat sale, which it was reminiscent, that's the way they filled in between the houses. Fellas came in from Limerick, came in from Thurles, came in from all the different towns to sell their ware, pots and pans, shoes, implements for farming, poultry, pigs, chickens, everything. You know, it was a big commercial business. So people got settled, and instead of commuting in, they decided their children might have bought a piece of ground in the middle of the street, they might have bought a title in Pupple's shop, and you know, you can revisit how people developed. Now, that was, you're talking about from 1800 right up to 1850. The famine came in 1847, and only the middle class people, the people that had little business going, little thriving businesses, they probably had big families as well, so they weren't making the money they would have been making prior to the hardship. Poverty, the recession we have at the moment, stops people from spending as well. So you ended up with the rich, the middle class and the poor. And if you were to put yourself in the poor situation, you had nothing at all. The middle class might have had enough just to barely exist themselves, and the rich were under certain demands from their children and the government, looking for the grain for the British Army, and most of the grain they returned every year on their crops. Some of it was kept for bakeries and what have you, but then with war and everything, the British took all the grain out of Ireland, and the potato failed. So the alternative to the potato was the bread, and that wasn't even had during the famine. They were making cheap bread from rye and all that kind of, just to fill your belly, but it didn't give you the nourishment that kept you healthy. And of course your potato kind of acted as a genealogical sound food, and when your body wasn't getting that, you got all the diseases, cholera and everything, and you're wasted away and you died of the hunger, literally.
So tell me this, I mean, where was all the produce going to that was being made around Nenagh?
It was all exported.
Did people not rise up against that?
No, because the landlords controlled everything. You see, nobody owned the land. You see, the Land League only started at the end of the 1800s. The Land League was rising up then. You didn't have the power with the kind of military police. The military and the police were protected the British from any ravages from the people. I mean, if you did anything wrong, or tried to object to it in any kind of a violent way or even in an explosive way, you were sent to the colonies. I mean, there's an awful lot of Irish people went to Van Diemen's Land in Australia for little things, but the courts here, you were sentenced to hanging if you did anything serious.
Would they hang people up in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hanging was nearly acceptable to the, if you did anything wrong, you know. Take the McCormick brothers, for example. I mean, they were hanged here in Nenagh, under the governor's house there, where the jail is. And
Tell us then about the Heritage Centre actually. What was that like?
Now you see that was the jail. That was the Heritage Centre was the governor of the jail, the manager, or you like to put him the boss. He had the jail. And then if you look at the buildings around the Government House, they were all jail. And the jail was used to put in any kind of... You see, before they built the jail in the 1850s, we say. And if you didn't go to jail in Nina, you were sent to Clonmel, to the jail there. So that jail was built, it was passed by the town commissioners. And it was built during Nina, really, the Nina you know, from the market house, from the market cross right up to Summerhill, up to Banba Square, Town Hall, the courthouse, the jailhouse, they were all built in the 1840s. They were all commenced, they were passed in the local town commissioners, and all that work was what kept a lot of fellas out of poverty. Stonemasons came in, and of course the population tends to get bigger when you have commerce working, regardless of what way it's working. People have work, and people that had work, you're talking about 8,000 people of a population, and that went down a century later, it was only half the population. So you can imagine we were overpopulated there during the famine. So if half of those people had work, we were doing well. Now we have a situation today where you have a recession, a serious recession on the way, and you're going to have half the people not working as well. I'd be an old sentimentalist, and I was thinking back to the times when we could get into our car on a Sunday and drive any road in the country, and you could pull up and you could have a picnic, or you could do what you like. Now you go out on the road, if you're not driving 70 miles an hour, you're a nuisance. And I think we ruined the natural Irish for our tourism and everything. We have all these motorways. I had a ticket the other day, or a bill the other day, that I sold a car to a customer, and the original owner of the car got a bill from the tolls that would have been the person that I sold the car to should have paid, and I suppose the lines got crossed in the licensing authorities when they were transferring ownership, and I ended up having to pay the toll, and I had to pay a double toll, because the penalty is if you don't pay it up in such a time. And I said to your man when I went after him, I said, "Geez, you owe me for tolls." "Oh, geez," he said, I didn't realise I was going through a toll bridge." I said, "You went through it coming back as well." I said, "You didn't pay the €3. It was €6 it would have cost him, and it was gone up to 12 when I got the bill." So I said to him, "I might be coming back to you again," because I said it looks like every 8 days, if it's not paid within 8 days of the notice, it goes again, So we're living in a land that's getting complicated for expenses. It's making us pay up for making mistakes, and I don't think people's income is worth, it justifies having to pay money out that you can't earn, for driving your own car, and you're paying road tax. I mean, we're totally could argue that one forever.
So tell me this now. Did the barracks up Summerhill?
Yeah.
Was that a replacement of the other one? Was that a British?
Yeah, now you can overlap. They built that and finished it in 1835, and all the military that were in the barracks here in Barrack Street, they all moved up to their new barracks up there, and this was vacated. And what happened to that when it was vacated was it was earmarked for civic offices, because the town hall and the courthouse and all them, they weren't there now. So they had to use every auxiliary office they had in Nenagh. So the town commissioners used that for a period, and when they built their new offices above in the town hall and the courthouse, they were all done by the 1843, 1844, and they vacated that again. Now the Legion Hall there beside, opposite, you know where the Legion Hall is there beside Louis McNattan's, the social services use it now, that was the Legion Hall. That was used by the town as a courthouse. The courts were, so you can imagine the town hall people, the local authorities operating out of the market house down here and using the buildings adjacent to that were belonged to the barracks as town halls and as courthouses. And if you look at Nenagh in general, all the names in Nenagh, old names in Nenagh, give you an idea of what went on in Nenagh. Castle Street was called Castle Street because it was heading for the castle. Pound Street was called Pound Street because the pound was up in Pound Street, you know, that's where they used to take animals. It's the pound, the nail, you know what the pound means, you know. And Silver Street was called Silver Street because it was on the way to the silver mines. Now that's another related reason why the British kind of had a fairly strong presence around. There was a lot of good mineral wealth around Nenagh. You had the slate quarries, you had the silver mines, they had a geological awareness of the benefits. And North Tipperary, Lower Ormond was a fairly good farming benefit. They planted themselves well. Now you had 1,200 soldiers based in Nenagh for most of the 1700s. So that was a fair lot of people when the population in Nenagh wasn't probably that, you know. So it was a big military. Nenagh was a big military garrison. And if you take the military barracks, that was a substantial building. So that was built to provide a big military presence in 1835. So I think there's an awful lot of military genes in Nenagh that people don't realise, you know. There's a population explosion in Nenagh as a result of, we say, soldiers marrying local girls and that, and going back to the old interest in your heritage. People don't go back, they don't suss out, you know, their origins as such. They might remember their mother and father and maybe their grandmother, but history was you know, it was forgotten about. They didn't follow through in their history.
So tell me this, if you can, I know you didn't really want to last time, but can you tell me about where the Bamboo Square monument? Yeah, well that was, you could put anybody up in that monument, because Jamesy was there. We call him Jamesy. Now, there was Earl of Ormond called James as well, you know. So I mean, you have to go back to the British times to know why did they put up. When you think, my research is, my own speculative research is, who was called James? And there was a James, Earl of Ormond, and the Ormond would have been taken in Clark Jordan, back right down to Offaly borders, you know. Ormond was the Earls of Ormond, and there was a James, Earl of Ormond. Now, who'd go to the expense of getting an old stone carved? Only somebody dedicating to whatever reason he was put up there, but there was never any big mad rush to find out, because it was part of history that maybe Irish people in general, when the Free State started, they got rid of him, you know. It's like pulling down Nelson's pillar in Dublin, you know. Nelson was British. I mean, we were a British colony, you know. As soon as we became independent and that anything associated, even though
I wouldn't be hard on the British. Because, I mean, would we have developed? I'd be hard on them for parts of history. I go back to Cromwell. But my own association with British people through my serving my time in the Army and Guards, I used to meet a lot of them during the summer. I always found them gentlemen, you know, I always found them nice people, and they'd be nicer than we would have been, you know. And that's not running down our own, but I always found the real English, and I started to find the Scottish probably were the hardest during, you see, Scotland was like Ireland. Most of their population of young men went into the armies, you know. The wealth in England was more or less in England. Scotland was high, barren country back during the centuries. And if you didn't have a job, you joined the army, which brought a lot of Scottish regiments in. And they kind of had officers, Scottish, like now the officer here in Nina, Major Dundas, that was in the regiment here, he was Scottish. He was from a Scottish well-off family, because I did a bit of research on him. And you can imagine, after Cromwell, if you take 100 years after Cromwell, when the British started really treat us like maybe rebel, maybe to them, we were scourge for part of that 1700s. You know, we were lazy according to the history. I don't know, maybe we hadn't the means to making a living. People didn't have the land, they were put out of their houses, the landlords burned down the houses, sent in the bails, knocked the houses. We rebelled, but we couldn't rebel weaponry wise because we didn't have it. We were probably resorting to have to steal, go in and poach in their land, and you were sent off to New Zealand or Australia or one of the colonies for 10, 15 years ago, and he poached a pheasant out of a landlord's land. You know, it was a kind of history that you don't want to go back in, because people had to eat anyway. You didn't die of hunger if you were capable of going out and snaring a rabbit. Even a rabbit, if you were caught taking a chicken or even doing anything wrong, you were taken into jail and you were sent off from the boat then with maybe 100 more. So you lived a kind of a hardship life, really, you know. And the history to that generation would have been what Cromwell did. The fear of God was put into them, and they couldn't rebel, because what was done during Cromwell's time would have frightened the living daylights out of for people for 100 years after. So I think if you go back to 1916 even, and you look at the proclamation and the MacDonagh and all those, they were all sent to Kilmaine and executed. I mean, we're not that long out of it, you know. We're not that long out of harshness. You didn't have a say. You weren't allowed to have a say. You took your punishment, and the misfortune was that you were caught doing whatever you did and you didn't get away with it. But you had people that probably handed you up as well, you know. People that maybe got away with doing something bad to turn you in, you know. There might have been that aspect too that got.
Tell me this, just to go back to, just in case there's people watching this that don't know what was up there before the statue of Mary. What was up there?
The statue of James, we call him. He was cut from stone, limestone. No, it wouldn't have been a work of art, because I had looked at him. I remember him there, but he was well weathered, and he had a hat on him, and he was same as a gentleman maybe that was a near to copy cut out stone of him as original. If you like, you showing me Tom Tierney there. I mean, who'd go to the trouble of cutting out a statue of somebody that was being dedicated as an Irishman, and no Irishman ever say who he was. He was dedicated through some British.
Was it a statue of a British soldier? Or what?
No, he was in.
An Irish?
No, he had to be. Okay, supposing I said to you that Peter Holmes been owning the town of Nina and was involved in the town commissioners, and he was running the town, and he had a lot of friends and they had a lot of money, and they decided to put a memorial to him of Peter Holmes up in the monument in the now that the courthouse and town hall they were all built in 1845, right up to 50. So the statue would have gone up in maybe the 1860s or 70s. And Peter Holmes died in 1843. Now, there was him, there was Dr. Freight, and there was people like that did an awful lot for the poor during the famine. And people didn't mind. There was nobody going to take down his statue because he was respected and recognised as being a decent individual. So the only people with money would have the money to put up a statue. Now you could speculate, it could have been Peter Holmes that was up there. Now, but I honestly can't tell you, I don't know who he was. But if I was to guess, I'd say now, who'd put up a statue of me if I probably did something good? No, or you for that matter. If you did something good and people recognised you and said, right, he was a great man, we'd have to dedicate something to him. Let's say you died and people didn't want you to be forgotten. They said, okay, we put up a statue. That's really what it's all about. And I suppose the church and everything decided, the church had a big say in everything after we say the British rule. The church had an awful say. So I mean, if you didn't know the Blessed Virgin, you'd say, who was she? Somebody dedicated the new statue, the Christ King or Blessed Virgin, and you say, oh geez, that's a worthy dedication, the opposite to what was up there, for that matter. And I'll try and find out for you, but I know the historians that I know, they don't know half it either, because they'd be speculative, and I don't like speculating. If I said he was Peter Holmes, that a lot of people agree with me, because I'd be looking for characters that were served people as well, that didn't ignore the plight of the people, and they're the kind of people that I'd dedicate a thing to, and there was a few of them around during the famine. The Boers would have been worthy of dedication because they spent their money on the famine. George Freight, he was a doctor here in Nina. He spent most of his money on the famine people, and he spent his money to buy the houses in River Lane, and he put the poor people into them. He spent his own money. He was dedicated by the Prince of Wales because he bought the property that he was living in, and he got it as a bargain price from the government for all the dedicated services he did. And there's a window above in the Protestant church in Church Road dedicated to Dr. Freight, So you can see if you're a good person and you do too much good, people will dedicate their thoughts to you. They say, God, he was a sound man. Now, if he done one wrong thing during all that, he wouldn't be dedicated, because for negate all the good he did. But he was a good man, Freight was, and so was Boers, the Boer family. And Peter Holmes wasn't a bad sort, even though he was a landlord, and there was people probably had this against the landlords. Oh, he was a landlord, he owned the town and he, so people had to have some problem with it. No, he was a good man. Yeah, there was a funeral went from the mortuary and up to the church one night. It was a big shot. Kevin Burnell and all them, they'd be well off, big Protestant house. Dan was walking and they wanted to get rid of him, and one of them went over to him when he was walking beside the hearse. So here, Dad, go in there, get yourself a pint, give him a half-crown. So Dan went into the Widow Ryan's, and he must have got the Widow Ryan to throw out a pint fairly quick anyway, because he came running up after the funeral again with a pint and he drank and something. That wasn't meant to be. Well,
you were saying about the streets. I found it interesting when you were saying Pound Street.
Yeah.
And can you think of any other ones now?
Well, if you take Queen Street. Queen Street would have been probably, you could relate it to the coronation of Queen, during the British time, Anything that was the old name, any of the old names you see in the streets that have changed, you relate them to British rule in our country, Church Street was going from the tower, we were there here at the graveyard here in front of my place. Church Street was going from there to the hospital. Now, that was Church Street, so you can imagine that street disappeared because it was related to the church. Everything had it started from small beginnings, the town, Ballally Lane, River Lane, all the names related to its time, and they upgraded them when it became a free state, and started improving the names, we could call them after Irish patriots, Patrick Pearson, whatever.
How did Ballally Lane get started? Is there any history behind that?
There was a ball alley up there in the men's club, up in, where Silver Line Fashions, or where the Shan Development offices are. That was another men's club, and they used to have recreation there. They had a ball alley at the back of it, and of course Ballally Lane. To get into the ball alley, you went up the lane, so they called it Ballally Lane. So Ballally Lane became the name for the house in Ballally. You heard it saying Nina, Ballally. Ballally Lane's gone when they were pulling it down. It's related to the original name.
It's been Ballally, like handball, is it?
Yeah.
Ball against the wall.
Well, that was handball was the only ball sport that you could play in moderate. You know what I mean? It wasn't like a team game. Yourself and your mates could go out for a game of volley with a rubber ball and you banging the ball off the wall. It was a great sport. Yeah. Still is, handball. Yeah. So all it meant doing was putting up two walls off the gable end of an old wall that was of a building and plaster, and you had a ball alley. It was a very economical recreational sport, it cost you nothing. You took on, it's like playing snooker, you took on your opponent man to man, you got better at the game. Table tennis, another one that was...
So footage of Nina in the 1950s up at the Malthouse pub, where the Malthouse pub down the road.
Yeah.
You're playing handball there.
Yeah, well we all played handball even after the gable ends of our own houses. I mean, when we went out after on a Sunday, we just play handball off any ball that was available. Hurling or handball was the only two games that you could play without having a team. One fella could go out and he could play handball himself. You didn't have to go to anywhere to find two or three guys play handball. You could do it off the wall there on your own. And two fellas played table tennis. When I was a young lad, we used to play table tennis in the Legion Hall. shed me heart to myself. He used to go down there every Sunday morning after Mass and we'd bang table tennis for an hour or two, you know. And
tell me this, is the railway station, is there any history behind this, like the British building it?
Yeah, well you see, public transport was a big thing. And everything came in the 1840s. The railway here was put in here in 1840. And you had only probably a railway between Dublin and Cork or before that, but they started to link up all the major towns and developed transport. I remember you had a horse and cart and coaches before that, so I mean, you couldn't go anywhere unless you could time the coaches, and they wouldn't be able to take any more than maybe 6 or 7 people. So I mean, it was travelling, commuting was a big thing. Then the trains came in, steam engines, and before the motor car was even, horse and trap or a horse and cart was the only way you could. My own father used to take the slates from Portrue, where he was born when he was a young lad, before he came to Nina. His parents, his father and his grandfather opened the slate quarries, opened the first hole. It was on our land that the first quarry hole was opened. And they used to cut the slates there, and they used to sell them all Tipperary town, which is a good 30 miles away. They used to take them on a horse and cart over the mountains for 5 shillings for a load. My father now filled me in on that part of the history of his own life. And he used to get a half a loaf for himself, heading off at 4 o'clock in the morning with the horse, and a half a bag of oats for the horse. And to take him from 4 o'clock in the morning and 12 o'clock that night before he'd be back. Yeah, you were walking the road, you were minding your boots as well, you know. You give the horse a rest and give him a few oats, and I mean, that's how people, that was hard earned money. After cutting out the slates and hauling them, getting ready and loading them onto a cart for 5 shillings. I mean, the 5 shillings was probably a lot of money back then, but that was their livelihood. And
would the British have financed all the railways?
Yeah, well, we see all that, all the real foundation of Ireland as such, in all the improvements came through British. I mean, you can't deny that. Even the bridge over there, you know, all those things were all provided for during the state, when we were a British state, and we had to start the first government we had, you know, had to start all over again and try and keep this thing going, you know, and commerce and everything that came with it. We were dependent on the British really for a long time afterwards, you know. I mean, British had a say in those right up to the 40s. And the first real politician we had was a good politician. To me, he was probably the best politician we ever had, was Lemass. He brought in the ESB network into Ireland, you know. An Irishman doing that, you know, an Irishman making things happen. He'll never be surpassed as a politician, and he was seemingly straight man, you know. He wasn't a crook, you know. Because that tends to go a tag, you know. But Lemass was a very good politician, and Arna-Crusha, it was the Germans built Arna-Crusha, but it was Lemass initiated getting Arna-Crusha and the electric light in Ireland. The Shannon, you know, turbines that went in there, you know, that was a massive development.